I've got news for you. I'm not from Ghana. You may have figured that out. My name is Marcel Vennebroek. I'm from the Netherlands, and I have been asked to share with you some of my visions, views on how to develop PPP. First of all, who am I? Okay, I come from the Netherlands. My background in PPP, I started with PPP about 20 years ago, working for the government of the Netherlands at the Ministry of Transport. At that time, we initiated the PPP program based on the experiences in the Netherlands. Not so much because we had an infrastructure deficit or an infrastructure finance gap, no. Our program in the Netherlands, as it was also in the UK, was driven by the ambition and the need to improve the efficiency of infrastructure delivery. For that purpose, we also established a PPP unit within the Ministry of Finance, same as we're doing right now here in Ghana. I was not working for the Ministry of Finance, no, I was working for the Ministry of Transport. To be more specific, for the Roads Agency. Hey, wait a minute, we're also developing roads, PPP roads here in Ghana. Yes, indeed. And the good thing is that also with the Ghana Highways Authority, they are establishing a PPP unit led by Shell Tulatsu. Some differences. At that time, I had 10 people working with me. Shelter is working alone. Question mark. How are we going to develop PPP in Ghana? Ever since, I've worked on PPP in numerous countries around the world. To summarize my experience, it's about 20 years. I've worked in about 30 countries and I've worked on about 100 projects. Countries including in Europe, Asia, and also in Africa. At the moment, I'm responsible for the feasibility study for the Accra-Takoradi Road dualization here in Ghana. I'm also at the moment responsible for an interesting assignment from the African Development Bank. How to finance the PIDA program, the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa, $86 billion. How are we going to finance that? The topic of my presentation is going to be structuring a PPP and preparing a bankable business case in Africa. Because in Africa it's significantly different than in Europe or the United States, or even Asia for that matter. So we have to take into account the specifics here in Africa. Fact, quality of infrastructure in Africa is below par. This will not come as a surprise, but it is a starting point. We need to improve infrastructure development in Africa. And there have been people who have given some thought about this, and they have even quantified it. They have concluded that today, in Africa, we spend approximately $45 billion per year on infrastructure. $45 billion. We need approximately $93 billion. We need to double our infrastructure spending. And mind you, this $45 billion includes both private spending as well as public spending. So we need to increase our spending. How are we going to do that? Well, we've heard this morning a lot of people saying, "Ooh, we have an infrastructure deficit, we need PPP." Well, okay, but there are more options than PPP. There are more options to finance PPP, to finance infrastructure than PPP. We could use our current account, we could use government debt, and we could use indeed private finance. Fact of the matter is, whichever source of funding you are going to use, it has to be recovered. Infrastructure is not for free. Someone has to pay the bill, whether it's the users or whether it's the taxpayers. Someone has to pay the bill. That's a fact of life. Whoa. Why is that? We're good. Now, So we're talking about private financing, we're talking about PPP, but let's not forget public finance. Also a fact. The fact is that tax revenue collection in African countries on average is below worldwide average as a percentage of GDP. That's a fact. So we can't say, well, we have an infrastructure gap, so we have to go to the private sector option, yes, but you can also consider to increase your tax revenue collection, not per se your tax revenue rates, because tax revenue collection is a combination of tax rates, but also the efficiency of tax collection. Are you actually collecting all the necessary taxes? And it's not that strange, this recommendation, because fact of the matter is, if you look at all the countries and you compare the quality of their infrastructure to the rate of tax revenue collection, you have to conclude that those countries with a higher quality of infrastructure have a higher rate of tax revenue collection. Those who are in the lower segments, African countries, lower quality of infrastructure, lower rates of tax revenue collection. So please, let's not only focus on PPP. We also need to think about using public finance to improve the quality of infrastructure. PPP is not only about financing an infrastructure deficit. PPP is much more delivering infrastructure more efficiently and more effectively. So let's have a look at those countries who are very active. India, my favorite country when it comes to PPP. They are able to deliver 2.4% of their GDP on infrastructure PPPs. Africa is not doing that bad. 0.8%, private infrastructure spending is 0.8%. That's not that bad. So one of the best, most advanced PPP markets is India. About 500 projects they have delivered in the past 10 years. And mind you, the economy of India is about comparable to the economy, the size of the economy of Africa as a whole. There are a few differences because India is a sovereign state, obviously, whereas Africa is the combination of 54 states with different currencies, with different country risk, with different levels of development. Now, India, 2.4% of GDP. That represents a value of approximately $30 billion. Okay, let's do the numbers. So India has been able, on average, in the past decade, to deliver approximately $30 billion through PPP. In Africa, we need approximately 90 billion worth of infrastructure investments to improve the quality of infrastructure. If we would be able to do the same as India, because think about the differences, but if we would be able to do the same as India, we would be able to deliver 30 billion through PPP. That still leaves 60 billion to be financed somewhat different. Okay? So if we would be as successful as India, and that's going to be very challenging, the maximum we would be able to do is 1/3 of our infrastructure need. That means that 2/3 of our infrastructure need has to finance differently. And I call upon all those ministers or development partners or whatever, please do not focus solely on PPP. PPP can deliver a significant portion of your infrastructure program, but it is not the only solution to a better Africa. But still, why am I still Are we still good? Yes, we are still good. Okay. Now, this is me coming from the Netherlands, trying to give some perspective to the dreams of Africa. Okay? I'm also going to tell a bit more about defining a PPP, the structure of a PPP, and that's going to have some overlap, obviously, with the story of Mike. Okay, but I'm going to thank Mike because it has been very inspirational and very instructive how he presented the PPP mode. He already introduced the concept of the contract authority, a public entity acting on behalf of the government. There are a few issues related to this. One is, it implies that when you engage in a PPP, it does not mean that you transfer the responsibility. You, as the government, are still responsible for the public service. So it also implies that you define what is a public service. One of the countries I work in is Kyrgyzstan, a former Soviet Union republic. I was talking to the Minister of Tourism, and he said, I want to do a PPP for the hotel. And I said, what? A hotel? Is a hotel a PPP? Is it the government responsibility to provide hotel services? No. Because a public service is a service that if the private sector does not take it upon, the public still needs it. It's a hospital, it's a school, it's a road. If the Mövenpick goes bankrupt, it's a shame for the shareholders of Mövenpick, but there's the Novotel, there's the Holiday Inn, there's Sheraton waiting to come into Accra. So why is a hotel a public service? It is not. The government is responsible for education, for transportation, those kinds of services. Second issue in relation to the contracting authority. It may seem easy, but look at the Accra-Takoradi road I'm currently working on. Oh, that's easy, that's the Ghana Highway Authority. Okay, that's the Ghana Highway Authority because that's the MDA, but wait a minute, then what's the role of the Ministry of Roads? What happens if the Ministry of Roads decides 10 years from now to build a road parallel to this road? And what about the Ministry of Transport? What if the Ministry of Transport decides to build a railway 10 years from now, parallel to the Accra-Takomasi road? And what is the role of the Ghana Road Fund? Okay, because they are by law authorized to collect revenues. A lot of complications that need to be sorted out. Why? Because you need to give clarity to prospective investors coming from Ghana, coming from abroad. The role of all parties has to be clear. It's not just one contracting authority that prepares and implements the project. No, you have to align all the relevant public stakeholders and have them agree. In the Netherlands, we do this even with a public stakeholder contract. All the relevant government bodies sign a contract with their individual responsibilities in relation to the project identified. Now, okay, obviously, the contract authority tenders the project and signs a contract with a private entity. Most important word, no, two important words, the word tender and the word functional specifications. Let me first focus on the word tender. PPP is an alternative delivery mechanism. It is a procurement mechanism. It is not, dear private sector, come to us government with all your beautiful ideas and we will allow you to develop those infrastructure projects. Those are called unsolicited proposal. And when you as a government receive an unsolicited proposal, please be very careful because the private sector has a major objective, a primary objective, and that is not a better country. No, that is to maximize profit for your shareholder. That's why they are private sector. So when they come to you as a government with an unsolicited proposal, their primary interest is profit. And that's okay. It's okay that they make profit, but not at the expense of taxpayers. So please use as much as possible a procurement mechanism. even if it takes much more time than just accepting an unsolicited proposal. It is time that will give you benefit. Now, the second word, as also indicated by Mike, is the word functional specification. Don't tell the private sector in detail what they have to do. No. We're going to do that based on functional specification. I want a road from A to B. And how you design it, it is up to you. I want to stimulate innovation. I want to hear those creativity from all those private sector contractors. I don't want to tell them what to do. I want to use the expertise and the competence of the market to come up with innovative solutions. The private sector is going to be responsible for design, build, finance, maintain, and operate of the respective facility. Interestingly, who is this private company with whom I am signing a contract? That's a so-called project company or a special purpose vehicle. Mostly, this company is going to transfer risks to subcontractors. They're going to hire a contractor through an engineering procurement contract, APC contract. They're going to hire service providers. Could be one, could be several. So this special project company will also set up a project structure, an organizational structure, which it will use to allocate the different risks. This special purpose vehicle will be financed through investors, the shareholders, and through banks. Most of the money will come from banks. Ideally, if 80 or 90% of the total funding would come from banks, that would be perfect, because then I would only have to invest 10% of my equity. Let's say I have a project of 100 million, I would only invest 10 million, and I could do more projects as a contractor, as a developer. In Africa, 10% equity is unlikely. The banks, if they would go up to 60 or 70%, it would be a lot. There are some further issues with the banking sector here in Africa. Look at Ghana. As Mike rightfully said, when it comes to PPP, we're talking about long-term arrangements related to the lifespan of the asset. A road, a hospital, whatever, a port. The lifespan of such an asset is 20, 25, 30 years. How many banks are able to give you a loan for 20 years or 25 years? How many banks are able to do so? In Europe, in the United States, numerous. In Africa, excluding South Africa, hardly any bank. Long-term financing in sub-Saharan Africa is mostly 5, 7 years. So I have to repay that loan within 7 years. But wait a minute, the lifespan of the asset is 20, 25 years. So there's a mismatch between the duration of the loan and the duration of your operation period in which you are going to receive revenues. Issue. We're going to see how we can address that. Okay, we have two main options. One is users will pay for the service. The most easiest example is a toll road. This is commonly known as a BOT, concession, build, operate, transfer. The private company will build the asset, will operate it for a period of 20 to 25 years, and he will charge the user a fee for the use of the road, for the water, for the energy, whatever. Most common, classical PPP, BOT. Alternatively, particular in the developed world, is the concept of BOT annuity. Because when it comes to a BOT, the user pay, there is an uncertainty. How many people are going to use a road 10 years from now? How much energy are we going to use 15 years from now? How many ill people are there going to be 20 years from now? You all will have to make such expectations on how many users there will be for an asset. And Nobody knows that for a fact. It's all uncertain. So that is why, on occasion, it may be favorable to opt for a BOT annuity. Which implies that the government will be responsible for an annual or a periodic payment based on a set of performance indicators. For example, the availability of a road. If the road is available for use 98% of the time, you will receive 100% of the agreed upon fee. If the road is only available 90% of the time, you will only receive 60% of your fee. So now the contractor has an incentive to maximize the availability of a road and to optimize the maintenance. He will opt to do maintenance during the night or in the weekend when the road is less used. He will not close the road for weeks of time in order to do his maintenance. No, he will do it quickly and efficiently as possible. Now this summarizes the concept of a PPP structure, and there are a lot of deviations to it. We've all heard the abbreviations BOOT, rehabilitation, operate, transfer. It's all very nice, all those abbreviations, but in essence, it boils down to these two options, BOT or BOT annuity. Who is going to pay for the service, the user or the government? Now, what does it imply for your cash flows? In a traditional concept, the government is responsible for developing a project. You will hire a contractor to build a road, and you will give that money once the road is constructed to this contractor. So the contractor recovers its cost. Maintenance will mostly be outsourced, annual basis, through contracts. Okay, what happens in case of a BOT? You don't have cash flows as a government. You only have cash flows for your overhead, for monitoring the contract. It will be the PPP company who will have the cash flows. He will have to attract loans and equity investments in order to pay for the capital expenditures. And he will have income from user charges to pay for his operating expenditures, to service its debt, to pay for the loan and the interest, and to pay dividends, if any, to the shareholders. In case of a BOT, now the income is not increasing over time because of the increased use of the asset. No, it's the stable payment from the government. Stable payment from the government. You know, BOT annuity is the favorite PPP mechanism in Europe. Why? Because it has less risk. It is the uncertainty of demand versus the uncertainty that a government will not meet its financial obligations. In Europe or the United States, a government will meet its financial obligations. In Africa, that is not always the case. So in Africa, investors are more neutral to the difference between a BOT and a BOT annuity. In fact, some are even telling me, we prefer that we collect our money from the users because that is less riskier than having to receive our money from the government. And mind you, I was not talking to the football players from Ghana. All right, now all these complicated structures, what does it bring us? Well, the benefits. First of all, world-class infrastructure. I mean, the private sector is known to build beautiful toll roads, power plants, high-speed rail, ports. Great. But as said, we can also deliver that as a government. What we have difficulties in delivering is delivering projects on time. Look at the UK and Australia, well-developed countries, a well-developed government system. In their traditional procurements, In the UK, only 53% of the projects were delivered on time. 53% of the projects were delivered on time. It's almost like Africa. In Australia, it was a bit better. It was 85% of the time. When compared to their PPP projects, wow, the PPP projects in the UK and Australia were delivered almost 100% on time. Now that's an interesting observation, because we also know that Africa is not known for delivering projects on time. What about on budget? Okay, on budget, well, we actually have the same. Again, look at the UK and Australia, two very well-developed countries. The UK was able to deliver 83% of the projects within budget, Australia 75%. When it comes to PPP, bang, here we go, almost 100%. Africa is not known for delivering projects within budget. Moreover, PPP can reduce life cycle cost 10 to 30%. This is international research, the Netherlands, the UK, Australia. And mind you, these are well-developed countries with a very well-developed government system. Now, why is that? Well, there are a few elements we need to take into account. First, what drives this value for money? Okay, we can talk about accelerating investments. Using conventional delivery implies on-balance fiscal obligations. When it comes to PPP, off-balance. Easy. More importantly, life cycle cost optimization. Life cycle cost optimization, because when conventional delivery, you will select the lowest bid for construction, low capex, low capital expenditures. But if you have an asset with low capital expenditures, the likelihood is there that you will have high maintenance expenditures. You're going to bid for the lowest price. I'm going to use cheap materials because I want to have that contract. I'm going to use cheap materials. I don't care about the implications for maintenance. Contrary to PPP, because there you want to optimize capital expenditures and operating expenditures. There you have an interest in the implication of the material you are using for the maintenance. Moreover, value maximizing incentives. Now, what is that? When it comes to conventional procurement, traditional procurement, I'm this private contractor. I want to have this contract, but I know there's competition. So I'm going to bid the lowest price. Because how am I going to get my profit? Once I have the contract, I'm going to try everything to squeeze the government. I'm going to tell the government, oh, wait a minute, I have to stop now because we have an issue. Your design, government, your design is not appropriate. So we have to stop our work and you have to pay us our standby fee. I have every incentive to squeeze the government because that is my profit. When it comes to PPP, I don't have that possibility anymore. No, I have the banks banging on my door. Is the project finished? No, it's not yet finished. Then try to finish it because you need to service your debt. Revenue needs to kick in. We need to have income from users, so the road needs to be open. Now, you don't have an excuse anymore. So you have all incentives to deliver a project on time. And I know Ghana. In Ghana, the contractors don't have the incentive to deliver a project on time because they're not being paid by the government because the government has a cash issue for some reason. And there the project stops. And I know, I understand that this is making projects 30% more expensive than they should be. You will not have that when it comes to PPP. So when Mike was showing you how to solve the infrastructure deficit in Ghana, the 1.5 billion, that included, correct me if I'm wrong, a 1 billion efficiency gain. And that efficiency gain can come from PPP. It's not so much about accelerating investments or financing. No, it is about this efficiency. That is the value for money you are looking for. Is PPP a guarantee for success? Dear ministers, politicians, whatever, no. PPPs can fail. PPPs do fail. It's a fact. I got numerous stories I have for you. There's Nigeria. There's Nigeria, the Lekki-Epi Expressway, which was going to be the first toll road in sub-Saharan Africa. Great problem. Last year, the Lagos government said, we're going to take it back because the private contractor wanted to have too high toll rates, which were unacceptable by the people. The flagship project in Lesotho, supported by the IFC, recognized transaction advisor. They know what they're talking about. Though the IFC project in Lesotho, the hospital is taking 1/3 of the total budget of the Ministry of Health. Is that something we want to have? India. I said India is one of the best markets for PPP. They are able to deliver approximately 40% of their infrastructure spending through PPP, and they want to increase that to 50%. More. Problem, their latest road projects, 21 road projects, mind you, 21, no bid. No bidder was interested because the market cannot handle, does not have the capacity to invest all that equity in those projects. Shortage of equity. Well-developed countries, Spain, economic crisis in Europe that has severe implication. We have the first bankruptcies in toll roads in Europe. Kenya-Uganda Railways, PPP deal of the year in 2005. It's still not rehabilitated. The London Underground, wait a minute, that's in the UK. That's also one of the most advanced economies in the world, one of the most matured PPP markets. Are they not even able to deliver their flagship projects, their multi-billion project, the London Underground, successfully? No, they have failed. PPPs can fail, PPPs do fail. There are requirements for successful PPPs. Indeed, we need to have well-prepared and bankable projects. We also need to have a conducive environment, and we need to have the capacity to implement projects. Now, let's look at Africa. Well, Africa is not doing that bad. If you look at the numbers, the size, 0.8%, that's more than the average in the developing countries. However, it's not always successful. One example, railways in Africa. There have been 12 concessions, railway concessions awarded in Africa. Only one is generating a positive net income. 5 have already been terminated and restructured, and the rest is performing marginally. We have to take into account private sector considerations. They look at a conducive environment, which includes country-level risks, which include PPP experience, which include also availability of finance. They look at project viability, and they look also at, very important, transparent competition, barriers to entry, availability of partners, and the likelihood of qualification. That needs to be in place. Now, is Africa ready? Ready for more PPP? Because that is what we need. Let's have a look. We have 19 countries, 19 with specific legislation on PPP, 6 countries with specific legislation in process, including Ghana, And we have, wow, 29 countries without specific PPP legislation. Okay, so more than half of the countries do not have a PPP law. And wait a minute, and this is the continent that needs to double its infrastructure spending. This is the continent where all the African leaders says, we rely on the private sector to solve our infrastructure deficit. Well, dear African leaders, it begins by establishing a conducive environment, and that is, have your PPP law in place. It is not a guarantee for success, but it's going to make life easier. It's going to make life easier. And if you want to accelerate projects, well, try to accelerate implementation of this law. It is not rocket science. Such legislation is around in numerous countries around the world. It is not rocket science, a PPP law. So I also don't understand. I started to work here in Ghana on PPP at the beginning of this year. And we expect that the PPP law will be passed by the end of this year. Why does it take so long? It is not rocket science, a PPP law. And all those 29 countries have to gear up ASAP if we want to improve our infrastructure quality. And it looks as if Africa has woken up in the last 5 years because most of these PPP laws have been enacted in the last 5 years. Whew. Okay, so we need to accelerate establishing a conducive environment. Our political leaders need to take their responsibility in order to make this happen. Viable projects. Well, we have a few issues in Africa. As you may know, there are 3 critical drivers for the viability of the project: income, costs, and financing. When it comes to revenue from users, we have an issue in Africa. We have limited ability to pay. I mean, the fact of the matter is the GDP per capita in Africa is significantly below the likes of Europe or the United States or whatever. And that is not reflected also in the costs of infrastructure, because the cost of infrastructure is almost twice as high as in those countries. Why? Well, our private sector in Africa is not that well developed, so we have to rely on international developers. They will come at a price. We have high cost of logistics here in Africa. We have some issues with transparency, and we have some major issues with bureaucracy, all driving the cost of infrastructure delivery. Because think about the example I gave here in Ghana. Because of the government not timeliness, no timely payments, projects are 30% more expensive than they should be. That's bureaucracy. That can be improved if the government would work more efficiently. Our cost of capital when doing projects here in Africa is twice as high as in Europe. In Europe, the average cost of capital would be 7, 8, 9%. In Africa, up to 20%. Combination of equity returns and interest rates. Why? Country risk, inflation, currency issues, and the limited supply of capital. Limited supply of capital. Is that a fact? Yes, that is a fact. If we look at all the countries in the world and we assess the size of the financial sector, we have to conclude that African countries are at the bottom part. The banking sector in the 2 largest African economies compared to the major economies. Well, I've taken a look at Nigeria, South Africa. It's a fraction of the countries like Turkey or South Korea or India or Brazil. Hey, wait a minute, India. India was the country where they had 30 billion of PPPs per year. Wow, 30 billion of PPPs per year. And we in Africa, we also want to have that 30 billion. But our banking sector is significantly smaller than the banking sector in India. So how are we able to get to that level? Furthermore, we have high inflation. The average inflation in Africa in the past decade was 7.7%. Average in the rest of the world was about 5.4%. We need to address this issue. Think about the toll road Accra-Takoradi. You pay 1 Ghana cedi for every crossing. That's the same rate as you paid 4 years ago when there was the last increase, which caused a large outcry. But our cost of living has increased. So actually, the cost of the toll should have also increased in line with the inflation. That is the normal practice. That is the normal practice. Do I hear a sensitive issue? All right. Since our local financing capacity is very limited, we have to rely on international banks. But international banks have dollars. International banks have euros. International banks, to some extent, have rands. When I have a toll road here in Ghana, I'm going to receive Ghana cedis. So I'm receiving local currency, and I have to pay hard currency. And if I look at the average depreciation here in Ghana over the last decade, that has been more than 10%. And Ghana is not alone in that. If you look at the Naira in Nigeria or other currency, there is a huge currency risk. And that's also something we have to address. Oh yes, high country risk. I'm in the Netherlands, I'm going to Ghana. Are you sure? Is it safe there? Well, of course it's safe here, don't worry, but there's the perception. And the problem is the perception is somewhat validated by facts, because 28 out of 54 African countries have experienced some level of armed conflicts in the past decade, whether it's in Nigeria or Kenya, the recent examples. That's not good for image building. It's not good for perception issue. And it may not be directly related to Ghana, but it does impact the general perception of private finance providers for bringing money to Africa. Limiting global finance appetite. Oh yes, this graph is the relative probability of sovereign debt default. And it's not me, it is the Institutional Investors Countries Credit Rating, March 2013. And it concludes that the probability of sovereign default in Africa is significantly higher than the rest of the world. And again, I'm not referring to any of the football players. Now, problems. No, not problems, challenges. These are challenges we have to address if we want to make the dreams of our politicians a reality. We need to address them. We need to address country risk. And the beautiful thing is, our development partners are there. The World Bank, for example, or the African Development Bank, who have instruments like the political risk guarantee or a partial risk guarantee to mitigate, to reduce the risk that a government will not meet its contractual obligation, or to reduce the risk that a government will get into a state of civil war or whatever. Then there is the World Bank to support private investors in taking on this risk. Currency risk. Well, the good thing is there is this instrument called currency swaps, in which you fixate the currency rate for a long period of time. Those instruments are provided by several commercial banks, but for example also by a facility called TCX, which is a facility established by various countries, including the Netherlands, the UK, Sweden. There's the interest risk. Well, same here. There are instruments available, interest rate swaps, which can help you fix the interest rate for a long period of time, offered by several international commercial banks. There's the inflation, which has to be addressed through tariff escalation formulas in a contract. Yes, you will have to increase your toll rate every year in order to account for inflation. And there's the demand risk. It may be necessary that government provides a minimum revenue guarantee. It may be. So there are numerous challenges, but those challenges can be addressed. There are various solutions available. Obviously, they will impact the costs of delivering infrastructure under a PPP arrangement. We cannot expect a state-of-the-art highway between Accra and Tema or Kumasi or Takoradi for only 1 CD per crossing. That is not achievable. We need to prepare projects. Yes, my advice as an advisor is to hire and manage those advisors. Why? Well, fact of the matter is, it is not the core competence of a government to do a feasibility study or to prepare a tender document. No, that's not the core competence of a government official. You have experts for that purpose. Financial experts, legal experts, technical experts, economic experts, they are all around there, ready and willing to help governments. Take into account, if you pay peanuts, what do you get? Very good. So, and mind you, when you're going to meet this private investor during a bidding process, he will also have his advisor sitting next to him. He will have his lawyer sitting next to him, a lawyer which will be paid $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a day. That's the A-team. It's financial advisor, Price Waterhouse, KPMG, Deloitte, Synergy, whatever, who will receive $2,000 a day. You will need to balance that. Create a level playing field. Make sure that you have an equally strong team to meet them. Otherwise, you will have Brazil against Germany. All right. Make sure that the scope of work for those advisors is clear. We now have the policy here in Ghana is we're going to hire an advisor to do the pre-feasibility. We receive their report. We will have a go or no-go. And, oh, wait a minute, then we have to go to the next phase, the feasibility study. Oh, we have to hire an advisor again. Oh, then we have to arrange money to get the advisor, advertise it. It's going to take another 3-4 months to hire new advisors to do a feasibility study. And here's this minister who says, I want to have this contract ready by the end of this year. Yes, but I don't have an advisor yet. Try to think up front on this. Conclusion. There is a need to increase PPP in Africa. We cannot rely solely on PPP, but as a fact of the matter is that we need to improve the quality of infrastructure to make the dreams Mike presented a reality. We need to increase PPP in Africa. There is potential for PPP in Africa. Frankly speaking, I think that Ghana is, in that respect, one of the better equipped countries in Africa. Ghana, together with Kenya. Kenya is also doing quite good. Nigeria. So there is definitely potential for PPP in Africa, but it is not going to be easy. Do not underestimate this. And it's not going to be a free ride. It's going to cost money. In particular, the first projects are going to be expensive. There may be failures. And we need indeed to take the time to prepare those projects. Fools rush in where angels fear to tread. And it's going to require commitment from those people, political commitment from the highest level. And it's going to require capacity. Okay, so we now have a well-staffed and well-equipped public investment division within the Ministry of Finance. But why is there only one person at the Ghana Highways Authority responsible for PPP, whereas we are in the process of preparing 3 potential PPP projects in the road sector? That's not good. Increase that capacity. Oh, sorry. Make sure that they have all the necessary resources. Yeah. And last of all, perseverance. PPP is like a marathon. And I know West Africa is known for its sprinters and not so much for its marathon runners. We want to do it fast. We want to do a 100 meter in 10 seconds. Okay, PPP is a marathon. Blood, sweat, and tears. But once we cross the line, once we have those first projects in place, then we have liftoff, because then we have the learning curve, and then we can accelerate. Thank you very much for your attention.